Here is part 1, 1500 words, of the horror story titled, He Thought His Past Was Buried, Until the Kids Returned. Part 1. The Knock at 307. There are things you bury so deep you start believing they never existed. You silence them with success, suffocate them with wealth, and erase them with reinvention. That's exactly what Charles Elwood did. Or thought he did. He was a man of calculated routine, rising at 5, espresso at 5:15, boardroom by 7. His schedule was airtight, his expression permanently unreadable. Charles wasn't the kind of man who made small talk. He didn't tolerate distractions. He didn't like children. And most of all, he didn't like questions about the past. His office, perched on the 27th floor of a London skyscraper, had floor-to-ceiling windows, pristine marble floors, and the kind of silence you only find in places where no one dares to speak unless spoken to. It was there, behind glass and concrete, that Charles believed he'd outrun whatever haunted him. Until the knock. It came on a Thursday evening, an unremarkable day otherwise. Rain smeared the city lights outside his penthouse. He had just poured himself a glass of scotch, eyes scanning through quarterly reports, when the doorbell rang. Not the intercom. The doorbell. Inside a building with 2 layers of security and a lift that required a key card just to reach his floor. He froze. No one ever knocked. He waited. Silence. Then again 3 soft knocks. Followed by a child's voice. Mr. Elwood, are you our daddy? The glass slipped from his hand, crashing onto the floor, scotch bleeding into the white carpet like spreading rot. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Only stared at the door as if it might open on its own. And then nothing. No footsteps. No retreating shuffle. Just stillness. When he finally pulled the door open, the hallway was empty. No children. No sound. He slammed it shut, heart pounding. His breathing was shallow. His throat dry. Something deep inside had shifted. Something old, something he'd buried long ago with an oath to never revisit. The next day Charles did what he always did. He ignored it. But the rhythm of his life had cracked. The espresso tasted bitter. The elevator seemed slower. His reflection in the mirror looked older, more hollow. And as he sat through board meetings and financial forecasts, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That someone, something, was following him. Shadows and corners. A whisper just beyond hearing. The echo of children's laughter in corridors that should have been empty. He took the long route home that night. Multiple detours. Changed cars twice. By the time he reached his building, the streets were empty and slick with rain. The concierge greeted him with the same practiced politeness, unaware of the dread curling in Charles's stomach. He stepped into the lift. As it rose, a chill swept over him. The lights flickered. For a second, just one flickering second, he swore there were small, dirty handprints on the mirrored wall behind him. He turned. Nothing. But the scent lingered, faintly sweet like old candy and mildew. That night, it wasn't the knocking that woke him. It was the giggling. Light. Innocent. The kind of laugh children make when they're hiding and waiting to jump out. Charles sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. The clock blinked 3:07 a.m. He reached for the bedside drawer, pulled out the Glock he kept hidden, a relic from the years when he couldn't afford to feel safe. He moved through the penthouse slowly, gun raised, breath held. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No movement. But the laughter continued. Faint. Playful. As if echoing from the walls themselves. He followed it, through the hallway, past the art gallery of curated pieces he didn't care about, into the den. And stopped. In the middle of the Persian rug lay a toy. A small wooden spinning top. Chipped, faded, old. He hadn't seen it in 20 years. Charles stepped back, gun trembling. The memories surged violently. A small cottage. A stormy night. A crying woman. And blood. So much blood. He dropped the gun. Morning came with no relief. Charles didn't leave the apartment. He shut every blind, unplugged the landline, turned off his mobile. He sat in the kitchen with the top placed in front of him on the marble island like a cursed artifact. He didn't remember keeping it. He burned everything. A knock again. 3 precise taps. He didn't answer. But this time they didn't wait. Tiny voices called out together. We came back, Daddy. He backed away slowly, breath catching in his throat. We missed you, one of them said. We remember everything, whispered another. His heart pounded as the walls seemed to tremble. The air turned ice cold. And then the lights went out. He woke up on the kitchen floor, still in the same clothes, the room dark but the clock flashing 8:12 a.m. The top was gone. So was the gun. He stood shakily, palms cold and clammy, and opened the security feed on his tablet. The footage from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. was corrupted. All static. All noise. But in a single frozen frame he spotted something. 2 children. Holding hands. Standing outside his door. Pale. Smiling. A boy and a girl. Around 6. Faces smeared with dirt. Eyes too wide. Too dark. He dropped the tablet. They were real. They had returned. 22 years ago, Charles wasn't a CEO. He was a broke dropout named Carl Elias. He lived in a town called New Ashford, the kind of place that vanished off maps when it was no longer needed. He shared a decaying cottage with a woman named Laura, lost, wild, and mother of 2 children that weren't his. They were poor. Angry. Always on the edge of something breaking. And then one night, it did. Charles never told anyone what happened. He just left. Changed his name. Burned the cottage to the ground. Started over. No one ever came looking. Until now. He called a number he hadn't dialed in 20 years. An old friend. The only one who knew who he was before the suits and skyscrapers. Jack. Charles said, voice hoarse. It's me. Pause. Carl? I think they're back, Charles whispered. The kids. Carl? Jack's voice lowered. You told me they never made it out of the fire. I lied. A silence, deep and grave. Where are you? Jack asked. London. Don't run this time. I'm coming to you. Charles ended the call. He stared at the door, then turned slowly toward the hallway. On the wall was a crayon drawing. It hadn't been there before. 2 stick figures holding hands. Labeled in messy childlike scrawl, me and my sister. We found Daddy. He reached out to touch it, but the paper was damp. Fresh. As if just drawn. Then he heard the scratching again. From inside the walls. Charles hadn't slept. Not in any meaningful way. After seeing the crayon drawing, he sat upright in a stiff-backed chair near the door until dawn, watching the hallway like a man expecting a home invasion. Only this wasn't a burglary. It was a reckoning. A confrontation 2 decades too late. He knew what the children were, or thought he did. Ghosts? Hallucinations? Maybe guilt dressed in flesh. But whatever they were persistent. They knew his name. The real one. And they knew the part of his life he'd paid dearly to erase. At exactly 6:15 a.m. the intercom buzzed. Jack Lawrence for Mr. Elwood, said the concierge. Charles unlocked the elevator from his private panel. When the doors opened, Jack stepped in, tall, lean, with gray streaks in his beard and eyes that hadn't forgotten what they'd seen 20 years ago. You look like hell, Jack muttered, stepping into the penthouse. You're not wrong, Charles said. They've been here. Jack sat, brushing aside the scattered papers and quarterly reports that no longer mattered. Tell me everything, he said. Start from the knock. Charles recounted it all. The voices. The laughter. The spinning top. The corrupted security feed. The crayon drawing that appeared overnight. Jack listened in silence, his fingers tightening around the arms of the chair. You're sure it was them? I saw them, Charles said, his voice hollow. Same eyes. Same faces. A little older but not enough. Like time didn't touch them. Jack stood and paced the room. If they're back, something has changed. Spirits don't just reappear without cause. What triggered it? Charles hesitated. I went back, he admitted. To the old property. Last month. It was compulsive. I wanted to see if the cottage was still there. And? It's gone. Nothing left. Just black soil and a for sale sign half buried in weeds. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't touch anything. But something followed you back, Jack said. Or you stirred something up. That night, Jack insisted on staying. He sat in the guest room, door open, Glock in hand, eyes heavy but alert. Charles lay awake in his own bed, counting the minutes, the shadows, the patterns on the ceiling. But when the clock ticked to 3:07 a.m., it didn't tick again. It stopped. And the air changed. Heavy. Electric. The silence now felt like a held breath before a scream. Charles rose from the bed. The hallway light flickered. A static hum buzzed in his ears. From the far end of the hall, a soft humming began. A child's voice. Singing. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Charles stepped out of his room. And saw them. 2 children. The girl stood barefoot on the hallway rug, wearing a tattered dress stained with ash and soot. The boy beside her clutched something in his small hand, a charred teddy bear missing an eye. They looked up at Charles. Daddy, the girl whispered, smiling. You forgot about us. Charles took a step back. I didn't mean. You promised you'd come back, said the boy. I didn't, You were gone, Charles stammered. You were supposed to be gone. You left us in the fire, the girl said. Her eyes glistened. You said you loved Mummy. Then you let her scream. A loud crash echoed from the guest room. Jack's voice shouted, Charles. He turned. And when he looked back, the hallway was empty. The children were gone. Jack had fired a shot into the mirror. I saw them, he said, panting. They were inside the glass. Like they were watching me through it. The mirror had cracked into spiderweb lines, and yet there was no reflection in the broken fragments. Just pitch blackness like a void. Charles didn't question it. Not anymore. I need to go back, he said. To where it all happened. Jack nodded grimly. You'll never be free unless you face it. By morning, Charles had his jet prepared. Destination, New Ashford. The town he'd sworn never to speak of again. It took less than an hour by air, but the descent into memory was far longer. New Ashford wasn't on most GPS maps anymore. The roads were cracked. Shops shuttered. Trees overgrew street signs. The past didn't just linger there, it ruled. They drove until the forest thinned and a clearing appeared. The lot where the old cottage had stood was exactly as Charles remembered, overgrown, hollow, and deathly silent. A crooked metal fence surrounded blackened soil, like the earth still bore the scar of what had happened. And in the center, where the living room once stood, something stuck out of the ground. A child's shoe. Charles approached slowly, the wind whispering through the trees like distant voices. He knelt and brushed away dirt. A second shoe. Then bones. Small. Fragile. Human. He stumbled back. They were never found, he said hoarsely. I thought the fire. I didn't check. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. This place is their grave. And you disturbed it. Suddenly the air grew cold. Very cold. The sky darkened unnaturally. And from the tree line, dozens of eyes blinked open. Small. Inhuman. Watching. The trees themselves seemed to shift, lean inward, like drawn by the scent of guilt. Then came the sound again, a lullaby but twisted. Distorted. Sung in multiple voices. Sleep, little children, the fire's not done. Charles turned to run. But the path behind them had changed. There was no car. No road. Only fog. Endless and churning. They were trapped. The ground pulsed beneath their feet like a heartbeat. Look, Jack said, pointing. In the center of the clearing stood the cottage. Intact. Perfect. As if it had never burned. Its windows glowed orange with warm firelight. Smoke curled from the chimney. And the door was wide open. Inviting. I'm not going in there, Charles whispered. But the wind disagreed. It shoved them forward. Branches twisted around their feet. The air screamed. And inside the cottage, the shadow of a woman passed behind the curtain. Laura. The children's mother. Inside the house, nothing had changed. The peeling wallpaper. The creaky floorboards. The cracked portrait of Laura above the fireplace. Even the scent, musty, burnt sugar and wet ash, was exactly as Charles remembered. Except it wasn't just memory. Because there was movement. From the hallway came the patter of small feet. Then giggles. Then silence. Carl, came Laura's voice from the kitchen. Not Charles. Carl. His real name. Jack raised the Glock again. I see her, he whispered. Charles turned. Laura stood in the doorway, skin pale, lips cracked, eyes dark and hollow. You left me, she said softly. Charles swallowed hard. You were going to hurt them. You were screaming. Throwing things. I wanted to protect them, she screamed, and the walls trembled. You took them away from me. You were high, Charles shot back. You weren't the same. You locked them in the room and set fire to the kitchen. Liar, she shrieked. You lit the match. You wanted to run. You said they weren't yours. You said. The lights exploded. Flames erupted along the ceiling. And from the upstairs hallway, two figures appeared again. The children. Burnt. Crying. Calling. Daddy. Come upstairs, it's your turn to burn. Jack grabbed Charles and ran. They burst through the door, through the fog, through the grasping trees. The cottage behind them collapsed into cinders. Again. This time with screams that didn't fade. The clearing emptied. The wind stopped. And the forest was silent once more. Back in London a week passed. No knocks. No laughter. No drawings. Charles sat on his balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Jack had left. Said he'd done all he could. But Charles knew something had changed. He hadn't been forgiven. Only warned. That night when he went to bed, something scratched at the window. On the glass was a message, written in childlike scrawl. We're still waiting upstairs. They say the past is a place you visit only in dreams or nightmares. But for Charles, the past had legs. It knocked. It whispered. It left footprints on glass and drawings on walls. And now, it wanted him to come upstairs. The message on the window hadn't faded with the morning light. It was still there, scrawled backward on the glass from the outside. We're still waiting upstairs. Charles stood frozen in his bedroom, staring at it like it might move again. His penthouse had no ledges. No accessible balconies on this floor. No trees tall enough for someone to climb. And yet, tiny smudged fingerprints dotted the outer glass, like someone had dragged their hands across the window, from mid-air. He didn't open the curtains that day. Or the next. Jack had gone silent. His last message was brief. Something followed me too. I need time. Don't contact me. Charles knew better than to push. Whatever they'd unleashed, it hadn't stayed confined to one address. That night he took a sleeping pill. Just one. It didn't help. At 3:07 a.m., he was woken not by a knock, but by the sound of creaking floorboards overhead. Which was impossible. His apartment had no second floor. But the sound was unmistakable, slow, deliberate footfalls pacing above the ceiling. Like someone small, waiting. And then the light fixture above his bed began to sway. Click, 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 it tapped softly. He didn't dare move. Until something dropped from the ceiling vent, soft like cloth. It landed beside his bed. He turned on the light. It was a child's nightgown, burnt at the edges, blackened by soot, smelling of smoke and sugar. And stitched along the neckline in faded thread were the words. Ellie. His daughter's name. Except, she wasn't his daughter. Not by blood. Not by law. But he remembered the way she used to hug his knees. The way she asked to be tucked in. How she always hummed that same eerie melody when playing with her spinning top. Ellie. And her brother Jonah. 2 children born from a life he'd tried to forget, from a love that had rotted into violence. He had raised them for 3 years. And left them in a fire. No, abandoned them in a fire. By the next morning, Charles had made a decision. If they wanted him to go upstairs, he would. But not in London. In their upstairs. The house. The cottage. The place that no longer existed, but still lived in echoes. He packed a single bag. No weapons. Just one old photo, the only surviving picture of Ellie and Jonah, taken the summer before everything changed. He flew alone this time. Back to New Ashford. When he arrived at the clearing, it was dusk. The sun bled through the trees like molten copper. But the land was different. This time there was no cottage. Just a staircase. Standing in the middle of the blackened lot, disconnected from walls, roof, or floor, was a narrow wooden staircase leading upward into nothing. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't attached to anything. It stood unsupported, the bottom steps partially sunk in the dirt, the top steps vanishing into mist. And at the base of it, 2 small toys sat side by side. A spinning top and a burnt teddy bear. Charles's breath caught in his throat. This was an invitation. A trap. And maybe a door. He stepped onto the first stair. Nothing happened. Then the second. The air thickened. By the third, the world below him began to fade, colors washed out, sounds muffled. By the fifth, everything behind him was gone. The trees, the sky, even the air felt different. He reached the top, and found himself standing in a hallway. It wasn't the penthouse, or the cottage. It was something in between. A house that existed only in memory, yet fully built. Familiar and wrong all at once. The wallpaper shifted when you looked too long. The doors seemed to breathe. And down the corridor, dim yellow light poured from under one door, slightly ajar. He knew what it was. The children's room. He walked toward it slowly, the floor creaking under his weight. As he approached, the spinning top rolled out from the shadows, spinning lazily in a wide circle, then stopping at his feet. He stepped over it, and pushed the door open. Inside were 2 beds. One pink. One blue. Burn marks streaked the walls. Stuffed animals sat neatly on the shelves, their eyes melted, smiles twisted. The window was cracked. Outside was nothing. Just black. But the room was occupied. Sitting on the beds were Ellie and Jonah. Burned eyes hollow, smiles wide. "Hi, Daddy," they said together. Charles felt his knees weaken. "I'm here," he said, barely a whisper. "I came back." Jonah tilted his head. "You always come back when it's too late." Ellie held her nightgown, the same one that had fallen from his vent. "You left us." "I was scared," he said. I didn't think you were still inside." "Your mother." "She screamed when you locked the door," Jonah said. "No, Charles's voice broke. I didn't mean. She said the fire would cleanse us, Ellie added softly. She said we'd be reborn. And we were, Jonah grinned. Just not the way she thought. Suddenly the door slammed shut behind him. The walls pulsed. The ceiling cracked. Flames began to lick along the edges of the room, but they didn't consume it. They just danced there mocking him. The children stood now inches from him. You made us a promise, Daddy, Ellie whispered. You said we'd never be apart, Jonah said. I'm here now, Charles choked. I'm sorry. I came back to face it. To face you. I can't undo it, but I won't run again. For a moment their faces softened. Ellie stepped forward and touched his hand. You remember the song? She asked. He nodded. And began to hum. Ring around the rosy. The children joined in. A pocket full of posies. As they sang, the flames faded. The walls calmed. And the room brightened, only slightly like a candle in a tomb. Then came the knock. From beneath the floor. 3 sharp raps. The children froze. Their faces changed, not to anger, but fear. No, Jonah whispered. She found us, Ellie said. The knocking came again, louder. Then the floor split. And Laura rose. Not the woman from his memories. This version was monstrous, burned, eyeless, grinning with a mouth too wide. Smoke poured from her wounds. Her hair was aflame. She screamed. He's mine. The room exploded into chaos. The beds caught fire. The toys screamed. The ceiling collapsed inwards. The children backed into the corner. She won't let you go, Ellie cried. She never forgave you, Jonah added. Charles reached for them both. I'm not leaving without you. With a roar, Laura lunged. Charles grabbed the children and ran through the flames. The hallway twisted and warped. Doors opened into voids. The walls became flesh, then brick, then fire again. He ran blindly, the children in each hand. Finally he saw it. The staircase. Still standing. He ran down it, faster than he'd climbed. Laura screamed behind them, her voice cracking the air. You can't unburn what's been set ablaze. But as Charles reached the last step and leapt, everything went dark. He woke up in a hospital bed. Beeping. White light. A nurse stood over him. You're lucky to be alive, she said. Someone found you unconscious in the woods near New Ashford. How long? He croaked. 3 days. Charles sat up slowly. His hands were burned. Not severely, but enough. He looked around. No sign of the children. But on the bedside table sat 2 items. A spinning top. And a teddy bear. No soot. No burns. Just clean like brand new. And next to them a note, childlike handwriting. Thank you for coming back. That night in the hospital, Charles finally slept. No screams. No fire. No knocking. But as the lights dimmed in the corridor, a shadow passed outside his room. Tall. Feminine. Watching. Waiting. Charles hadn't spoken to anyone for 3 days after waking up. The hospital released him with superficial burns and a mild concussion. No one asked how he'd ended up unconscious in the middle of the New Ashford woods. The authorities had more questions than answers, and Charles gave none. He was discharged with a limp, bandaged hands and 2 mysterious objects, a clean spinning top and a pristine teddy bear. Neither should have survived the fire he dreamed of. Neither belonged in the real world. But they were here, sitting in his bag, like a thank you gift from ghosts who had momentarily forgiven him. But the shadow that passed his hospital door on the 3rd night proved something terrifying. Not everything had stayed behind in the forest. She was still here. Laura. Back in London, Charles returned to his penthouse. The curtains were drawn, mirrors covered. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was pregnant, bracing, thick like air before a storm. He set the spinning top on the coffee table and watched it. It spun by itself. Just once. Then it stopped, pointing directly at the hallway mirror. When he looked into the mirror, he saw nothing strange. Until the lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, Laura's reflection stood beside his, gaunt, burning, smiling. When he turned, the room was empty. He called Jack that night. It went straight to voicemail. Charles left a single message. She didn't stay behind. She's here. I don't know how much time I have. The next morning, Jack replied in a single encrypted text. I warned you. She's tethered to you. Not the house. Not the children. Charles knew what that meant. He had opened the door. Faced the children. But Laura had come through the same opening, not as a grieving mother, but as a twisted remnant of rage, betrayal, and scorched obsession. He hadn't just faced his past. He'd brought it home. That evening his television turned on by itself. Static. Then a flicker of a home video. Ellie and Jonah running through a garden, giggling. Then a sharp cut. Laura on the porch, smiling wide, her arm around Charles, her eyes glassy from too much drink. And then another cut. Laura screaming in the kitchen. Plates breaking. Charles shouting. A child crying. Firelight flickering just out of frame. And then static again. Charles screamed and threw the remote, shattering the screen. But the audio kept playing. Her voice, whispering now, filled the room. You made them hate me. He dropped to his knees. I loved them, he shouted. You were the one who changed. You locked them in. You were trying to save them, her voice hissed from every wall. From you. Then silence. The power went out. Charles sat in the dark for hours, watching the spinning top glow faintly in the moonlight. Then came a knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Not childlike this time. Measured. Adult. He didn't answer. Instead he stood and approached the door. Quietly. No peephole. Just a warped shadow beneath. Then her voice. Soft. Come. Carl, please. I've made dinner. The children are waiting. Don't ruin another evening. His breath caught. That exact sentence. Word for word. The last thing Laura had ever said to him before the fire. Before he stormed out. Before she snapped. He turned the lock. Opened the door. No one there. But the hallway was filled with smoke. That night Charles packed a bag and left. Not by car. Not by train. On foot. He walked the city, unsure of where he was going. And around 2:30 a.m. he found himself outside an old church, long abandoned, windows shattered, ivy strangling the steeple. He didn't remember how he got there. But the door was open. And inside, standing at the altar, were Ellie and Jonah. Still ghost-like. Still young. Still burned. But their faces weren't angry. They were terrified. Daddy, Jonah said, you brought her here. She followed you out, Ellie added. She's in you now. Charles staggered back. What do you mean? You didn't just remember the past, Jonah said. You opened it. You unlocked her. Behind them, the stained glass window blackened. Laura appeared. Not as a reflection. Not as a ghost. As something more. A shape made of fire and bone. A woman in pieces. Her eyes hollow, mouth stitched in an eternal scream. The church trembled. And suddenly pews caught fire. The ceiling cracked. And the air twisted, like the fire was alive. You took them from me, she roared. Charles stood before her, arms outstretched. Take me instead. The flames hesitated. Ellie stepped forward. He means it, she whispered. He came back. He remembered. No one remembers me, Laura hissed. No one mourned me. You were lost, Charles said. But you weren't forgotten. You were broken. And I didn't know how to help you. But I see it now. You were hurting long before the fire. Laura's body flickered. Not with rage, but uncertainty. A moment of clarity. And in that brief second, Charles walked toward her. He placed the spinning top in her hands. I took this from the ashes, he said. It's yours. Laura looked down. For the first time she seemed human. A tear, fire and ash, slid down her cheek. And then she vanished. The fire disappeared. The church was intact again. The children were gone. And Charles stood alone at the altar, spinning top lying motionless at his feet. A week later Charles moved out of the penthouse. He didn't return to corporate life. He didn't write a memoir or go on TV. Instead, he bought a modest flat on the outskirts of London and started working at a community outreach center for children with trauma. Every night he lit a candle. One for Ellie. One for Jonah. And one for Laura. But sometimes, around 3:07 a.m., the flame on Laura's candle flickers sideways, as if blown by an invisible breath. And once, just once, he found a message written in ash on his bathroom mirror. Thank you for seeing me. It had been 8 months since Charles left the penthouse. 8 quiet, steady, uneventful months. He now lived in a second-floor flat above a florist's shop, where nothing flickered, no footsteps echoed at night, and the only knocking came from the friendly postman who brought handwritten letters from survivors and parents of children he now mentored. He had become peaceful. Not happy perhaps, but whole. Teaching kids art and memory rebuilding exercises in the center near East Bank Estate, helping them process trauma, encouraging them to draw out their feelings instead of burying them. He hadn't heard from Ellie and Jonah since the night in the church. Not in dreams. Not in signs. He thought maybe, just maybe, he'd given them rest. But grief has a way of testing your hope. On the 9th month it started again. First came the drawing. A small child named Leah, quiet, 5 years old, eyes too wide for her age, handed Charles a paper during class. She'd been drawing black scribbles for weeks. But this time she smiled. The picture showed a staircase. Freestanding. Cracked. Surrounded by fire. At the top were 2 small stick figures. At the bottom, a woman. Huge. Burnt. Red eyes. And next to her, Charles. Except the label wasn't Mr. Charles. It was Dad. He asked her gently where she'd seen that. Leah tilted her head. The kids in the corner told me. Charles froze. What kids? She pointed to the playroom closet. Ellie and Jojo. They said you still owe her something. He could barely breathe. Oh, who? The Bernie lady, she whispered. That night, Charles sat in his candlelit flat, staring at the spinning top. It hadn't moved since the night in the church. He hadn't lit Laura's candle in weeks. But now the wick sparked by itself. A tall flame. No wind. No heat. Then, smoke curled upward. It formed a shape. Not her face. Not a scream. But a door. He knew what this meant. The final piece of the past wasn't buried. It wasn't the fire. Not even Laura's rage. It was why it happened. And what it was truly hiding. He returned to New Ashford one last time. Not to the clearing. This time he followed the children's old path through the woods, the one behind the rose garden, past the dried-up creek, where Ellie had once taken him to see her secret tree. There, in the roots of an ancient, split oak, was a rusted hatch. He hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been meant to be seen. But now it waited, unlocked. He climbed down a narrow iron ladder into pitch black. The air was damp, smelling of ash and old soil. At the bottom, a tunnel stretched forward, dirt walls lined with faint handprints. Children's handprints. Hundreds. Some smeared. Some reaching upward. This wasn't just memory. This was something older. Deeper. He followed the tunnel until he reached a circular chamber, lit by a single flickering lantern. At the center stood 3 figures. Ellie, Jonah, and someone else. Not Laura. A girl. Small. Thin. Wrapped in burnt bandages. Her eyes were wide, black, and endless. She was humming. A low, sorrowful tune. Charles stepped closer. Who are you? Jonah whispered, the first one. Ellie added, before us. Before Mum. She was always here. Charles frowned. You mean, before the fire? Ellie nodded. Before all the fires. She is the fire. The bandaged girl looked at him. And for the first time Charles felt true cold. Not absence of heat cold. But the kind that came before a flame was born. The silence that screamed just before the match was struck. Why am I here? He asked her. She spoke, a voice that sounded like a child inside a furnace. To finish it. Suddenly the walls of the chamber lit up, with memories. But they weren't his. They were Laura's. A flash, Laura as a child locked in a cupboard by her mother. Another, her holding her little brother's hand as he burned in a barn accident, her screams ignored. Another, her first hospital stay. Her first ghost. Her first lie, I don't remember anything. The fires that followed were not always accidents. Some were control. Some were sacrifice. And Charles, he had just been the final chapter in a cycle that had started long before them. Laura had become the fire because it had always been with her. And now she had passed it on. Charles staggered back. No, this isn't mine. The girl in bandages stepped forward. She reached into his chest, not tearing, not piercing, just phasing through. She withdrew something black and smoldering. A shard. Still pulsing. You carried her in, she said. Now carry her out. The tunnel began to collapse. The children ran. Ellie grabbed his hand. Jonah pulled his sleeve. The girl stood in the center, smiling calmly. She began to hum again. And the fire consumed her. Charles woke up just outside the oak tree. The hatch was gone. His hands were burned again, but different this time. Not external. Internal. He felt like something inside him had finally died. Or maybe, something was born. Back in London, the spinning top no longer moved. The teddy bear began to fade, its fabric thinning, its button eyes dull. And the candle? It stayed dark. Even when he tried to light it. The children didn't visit again. Not in dreams. Not in drawings. Not in whispers. He received a letter weeks later. No address. No return stamp. Just 3 words in crayon. We're free now. Charles never rebuilt his career. Never returned to the old world. He stayed with the outreach program. Sometimes, when children drew fire or monsters, he simply nodded and said, I believe you. And that was enough. But every year on the anniversary of the fire, he walked to a quiet hilltop outside New Ashford, where no structure stood. He lit 3 candles. One for Ellie, one for Jonah, and one he didn't name. The last one never stayed lit long. But it always burned just long enough to whisper, "I see you too."